Thanks, everybody. Like Mandy said, my name is Angie Chaplin, and I own a small business in Iowa City called Mindful Leadership. I am also the regional coordinator for a behavioral-based change model called Smart Recovery. I am also active as a community volunteer in Iowa City. I'm also a teacher in training with the Center for Koru Mindfulness. But if you really want to know who I am, we need to dig a little bit deeper behind the titles, behind the jobs. So the first picture you see in the top left corner is me in my glory days here at Buena Vista. I am a 1993 graduate of BV. I came to BV with the intent of being an international news anchor and jumped right in. It was called Innovation Video back in the day, and I was the nightly news anchor. I also hosted my own talk show here on campus, and my counterpart was the sports guy who was the kicker on the BV football team and is still a good friend. But with all of these images, it's more about who am I? Who do I stand for? Who do I stand with? And what types of projects do I stand behind? So to really know me, you need to know that I grew up in a small town in northeast Iowa, Decorah, Iowa, where I am the daughter of a school administrator and a stay-at-home mom. You need to know that I came to BV never having left the state of Iowa, not knowing anybody in the community, not knowing what I was going to be involved in or signed up to do. You also need to know that I am an alcohol-free leader in long-term recovery from alcohol addiction. And I will share with you more about how my BV experiences, as well as my own leadership lessons, have helped me become the leader, the mom, the daughter, the sister, and the professional business owner that I am today. A lot of these images are me demonstrating what's most important to me. One of the topics that we've been sharing with students this week is understanding your values. And for me, being able to say I am grounded in my values means being able to say that I stand for, with, and behind integrity, clarity, curiosity, connection, and love. And you will see some of the examples of those very important values there on the screen. When I was introduced to leadership in its academic sense, it was really understanding the definitions. And I know many programs, including the one here at BV in organizational leadership, it's really defining leadership characteristics. I already had my master's degree before BV started its org leadership degree. Otherwise, I could say I was a dual graduate of BV. But my academic introduction to leadership came from Seton Hall University in New Jersey, where I was introduced to a book by Jim Kouzes and Barry Posner called The Leadership Challenge. When I was introduced to the Leadership Challenge and the 5 practices that the book is based on, what it reinforced for me was the leadership facts. It's grounded in 40 years of research. It's well tested, well validated in terms of an assessment and an instrument, but it also brought in leadership feelings. For somebody who is a business person, having leadership feelings was unheard of. I was under the understanding that when you came to work, it was all about the work. You didn't bring your feelings with you. And what the Leadership Challenge shared with me is that we are grounded in facts and evidence and research, but we are feeling beings before we are knowing beings. And the Leadership Challenge is what helped me understand that. It also helped me understand that leadership is a journey, and it's a journey through practices, commitments, and behaviors that help us demonstrate leadership on a day-to-day basis. That it's not something we show up at our office door, put on our leadership hat, act like a leader, leave work, take off our leadership hat, and go home for the day. Leadership is about who we are, and it's about what we do. And this is a look at the Leadership Challenge journey. What you'll also see is, yes, there's an entry point, but it's a continuous loop of learning and experiencing. And that's certainly been my experience with the Leadership Challenge. So there's really 4 fundamentals that we'll talk about this afternoon. The fact that leadership is self-development. Leadership requires lifelong learning. Leadership is a relationship, and that relationship begins with ourselves. And leadership, like any skill that we hope to improve, requires deliberate practice. Now, the Leadership Challenge started its research 40 years ago with the question you see on the screen. What characteristics do you look for in a leader you would willingly follow? So we've asked this question of students all week. And after the research had been done for a number of years, of course, the characteristics list became long, but through some analysis, it was drilled down to the 20 characteristics that you see on the screen. So just looking at that list and just kind of shout out, what are some of the characteristics that just jump off the screen to you as something you would say, yes, that is something I look for in a leader I would willingly follow? Yeah. Dependable, okay. Caring. Loyal, yep. Broad-minded. I mean, honestly, we would like all these things in a leader, right? Depending on the situation, we might be seeking different characteristics at different times. But what the research over 40 years has shown is that there are 4 characteristics that have consistently risen to the top of what people look for in leaders they are willing to follow. And that is a leader who is honest, inspiring, competent, and forward-looking. Now, being a researcher myself, I was curious how this data would match up to characteristics of BVU students and what they're looking for in leaders they would willingly follow. And a little different take on the responses. BV students, the ones who completed our survey, of course, are looking for leaders who are honest, caring, dependable, and supportive. So then the next question is, well, what does this leader look like? What does this leader do to demonstrate these characteristics, to make someone want to willingly follow them? And that's what leads to the 5 practices of exemplary leadership. Model the way, inspire a shared vision, challenge the process, enable others to act, and encourage the heart. So each day this week, we have focused on one of the 5 practices and sharing some of the key points of that practice through hands-on activities and examples and conversations that we've been having with students. And I'll be showing you some of those examples as we take a closer look at the practices. So first is the practice of model the way. Now, each of these 5 practices also comes with 2 commitments that really describe what that practice looks like behaviorally. For model the way, it's clarifying your values to find your voice. And secondly, be an example by aligning your actions with your values. So really, even before you hope someone will follow you, you have to first be a leader worthy of followers. And a leader worthy of followers is one who knows their values, uses their voice to express their values, and serves as an example by aligning their behaviors with those values. Now, this was me at the time I was introduced to the Leadership Challenge. It was about 2005. I was a HR professional working in Waverly, Iowa for a nonprofit organization. And as part of my own values discovery and really understanding who I was as a leader, I started to take my health, my mental health, my physical health, my emotional health a lot more seriously. And having never been a runner, I signed up to be a charity athlete for the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society's team in training, and ultimately finished 7 marathons, 4 full and 3 half marathons, raising over $10,000 for the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society. So this picture was after one of the Chicago marathons, and those are my 2 little guys who were my biggest champions and cheerleaders, not just through graduate school, but also through this new marathon mom kind of vibe I was putting out there. But it was also a time of deep self-discovery and understanding, who am I? What do I stand for? I was a wife. I was a mom of 2 young guys. I was working. I was trying to identify with all the roles and responsibilities that other people told me I should have. So it became identification with my job, identification with my titles, identification with my role as being a supportive wife and a supportive mom. And of course, as I was learning and growing over the years, so have my 2 little guys. And my little guys I'm 5'1", and shrinking. My little guys are 6'3". Their father is not even 6 foot, so there's some gene somewhere that equates to height in our family. My oldest son in the plaid shirt is Jake. He is working and living and adulting very successfully in Des Moines. He graduated last May from the University of Northern Iowa. And my little boy, Jeremy, is a junior at the University of Iowa, where he is a member of the Iowa Hawkeye football team. So as he's learning and growing, his definition of growth is very different from what my definition of growth might be. But what you don't see between these 2 images is this person. This person was lost. This person didn't know where she belonged. She didn't know what she stood for. She didn't know who stood beside her. And so she turned to alcohol to help her try to figure it out, to help her try to escape, to help her try to numb. That led to 3 hospitalizations. That led to an arrest for an OWI. That led to a night in jail. That led to a stay in the intensive care unit. And ultimately, that led to nearly losing her life. This was me in April 2019, when I was living alone in Dubuque, trying like hell to figure out who I was. And when I was released from the hospital for the last time in February of 2020, a doctor sat me down and said, "You almost didn't make it this time. Next time you won't." And literally gave me 2 choices. He said, "You can keep drinking and you're gonna die. Or you can choose to stop drinking and give yourself a chance at a better life." I chose wisely. And I entered an intensive outpatient treatment program that consisted of 9 hours of face-to-face counseling with a substance abuse counselor, and I was all in. I was doing all the things. I was attending all the meetings. I was discovering who I was as this healthier version of myself. 40 days into my newfound sobriety, COVID hit and put a halt to all the in-person services that I had built my entire newfound sobriety on. So living at home by myself, unemployed, isolated from not only family, but from a community, I was at a crossroads and searched for any tools that I could find to help me move forward. And I remembered from 15 years earlier, the book, The Leadership Challenge. I remembered the power of exploring values, the power of reconnecting with ourselves. So I sat myself down at my kitchen table and I reread the book. And I redid the values activities. And I reconnected with who I was. And thanks to finding my values, thanks to staying grounded in my values, I just recently celebrated 3 years of sobriety, and I am proud as hell to talk about the journeys that I've been on. Because for too long, I didn't know who stood beside me. But as you'll soon find out, I had a lot of beavers who stood beside me. Leading with authenticity means knowing our values and fearlessly living by them. So you can see my 5 core values that I shared with you earlier, thanks to rediscovering what really mattered with the Leadership Challenge. These are the same experiences that we've been sharing with students. I came this past weekend and spent Sunday evening meeting with student senators, led them through a values discovery using customized BVU values cards, helping them reconnect or maybe for the first time discover what they stand for, asking them what really matters most. And then more importantly, asking them if what they're doing aligns with the life they're trying to create. And it really is a conversation prompt, because evaluating and examining and expressing and experiencing our values is more than a one-time values discovery. It's an ongoing dialogue and conversation. This word captures the power of model the way. How might you pronounce this word? Any guesses? Jim and Barry, the authors of the Leadership Challenge, pronounce it as Dwizzywid. So when we talk about Dwizzywid, we also know that Dwizzywid is an acronym. Anyone know what the acronym stands for? Do what you say you will do. So there's 2 parts to that equation, right? There's knowing what to say, there's using your voice, and then there's doing the thing that you say you're gonna do. So without knowing your values, without knowing what voice to use, it's hard to do anything to demonstrate your values, to really follow through on what you say you're going to do. So I want to give you just a taste of what this feels like, not only for you as a leader, but for people around us when we're struggling to align what we say with what we do. So I'm gonna ask everybody to please stand up and make sure you can see the screen. So you will see a series of arrows, and all you need to do is say the direction the arrow is pointing, up, down, left, or right. Okay? Okay, very good job. Very smart people in this room. Next row, you will tilt your head in the direction the arrow is pointing. So left, right, up, down. You might hear some snap, crackle, pops if people's necks kind of pop in and out, but you don't have to say anything, just tilt your head in the direction the arrow is pointing. Okay, still pretty good. Now, things get a little bit trickier. This time, you will say the direction the arrow is pointing, tilt in the opposite. Say the direction the arrow is pointing, tilt in the opposite. Say the direction, tilt in the opposite. Okay, last row. You will tilt in the direction the arrow is pointing and say the opposite. Tilt in the direction and say the opposite. Okay, here we go. Okay, last chance. Oh, that's just a trick arrow. I just had to throw that one in there. Thank you for playing. Go ahead and have a seat. I use this exercise, this activity, to illustrate some different things. First of all, how many of you, especially as things started getting harder, how many of you started looking around and trying to copy what other people were doing or seeing what direction, what things were saying? More importantly, how many of you gave up and just stopped? Right? Yeah. But let's put that in the context of leadership. When we have a leader who's saying one thing and doing another, how often do we just give up? Or quit? Or quiet quit? Or actively quit? Whatever the phrase might be, right? So not only do you feel that tension of that exercise, but so do the people around you. When we, as leaders of ourselves, we feel that inner conflict. We feel that cognitive dissonance when we're thinking one thing, oh, I should do this, but I'm doing this anyway. We feel that, and the people around us feel it as well. So the more clear we are on our values can serve as our internal compass, keep us pointed in the right direction, and keep us walking the right path. So after modeling the way, we look at the second practice of inspire a shared vision. So going from values and behaviors to inspiring a shared vision. And what this looks like is really that characteristic of forward looking. So not just saying, here's where I think we're going, it's here's where we're going. And here's why. So it's using what you know to be the values of the organization, or maybe the learning outcomes of the activity that you're doing, and being able to enlist others in owning a piece of that. One of the examples we use for inspiring a shared vision is the famous speech by Dr. Martin Luther King, I Have a Dream. And what was so powerful about that speech was that he didn't call it, I have a strategic plan. It was, I have a dream. And it was using communication tactics and techniques and strategies to not just talk, but to persuade and inspire and empower. And that's what inspiring a shared vision looks like. When we're driving into a bank of fog, which happens often, if I remember correctly, along the lakeside, we start gripping the steering wheel, right? We start peering as if we can see further ahead of us. When we don't know what direction we're going, it's as if we're in a fog. And so by getting back redirected, recentered on our values, it can keep us moving forward. So how we shared this with students was to give them the tools they needed to create a vision board. So Megan Westcoat got all the supplies to be able to cut out pictures and use the glue sticks and find the images for students to think big, to visualize their values in action, and to start think about how do my goals align with what I'm doing on a day-to-day basis as a student. Not just as a student leader. And so it's exciting to think about what can I do when I'm grounded in my values and I know what direction I'm going. The third practice is challenge the process. Honestly, as I was using these practices to get sober and stay sober, challenge the process, other than model the way, which is really what kick-started the journey for me. Challenge the process was the practice I had to do the most, and still is, because challenge the process is seeking opportunities for doing things differently, which means for somebody who uses alcohol as a way to cope, it meant putting down the drink or the bottle or the glass, honestly, was the easy part. The hard part was having to deal with the emotions, the situations, all of the normal ick that happens on a day-to-day basis. So I was challenging my own process. I was understanding what failure felt like. I was understanding, how do I learn from my mistakes? How do I get rid of the guilt and the shame from my past and use it as a springboard to the type of vision that I see for my life? How do I celebrate every milestone, from marking my 30 days to celebrating 1,000 days last October? Challenge the process also looks like expanding our ways of thinking. One of the challenges to this process is getting past, well, we've always done it that way. We've always done it that way because it feels safe, because it's historical, because if we do it a different way, we might fail. That's exactly why we need to challenge the process. So we brought everyday items and gave students an innovation quiz to try to think about, how do we learn from failures? For example, how was the Slinky developed? Well, the Slinky was created from a naval engineer working with tension springs. We talked about, how was liquid paper developed? Well, liquid paper was used by artists when they would paint over their mistakes. We talked about how Viagra came about. It was originally marketed as a heart medication. And then somewhere along the line saw, it did increase circulation, but it wasn't just beneficial for the heart. So knowing that there are uses and opportunities to learn from our mistakes is what helps us challenge the process. Challenging the process also means embracing a both-and mindset. That means we seek to understand. That means we are open-minded enough that we just want to get it right. We don't want to be right. And I'll tell you, I'm still learning this practice. I'm still practicing this practice. For me, it's about protecting my energy. And as someone who you might expect to be a pretty strong extrovert, I have learned to embrace and love my introvert, because that means I can take time to get back to my values and be curious about what causes me to react versus respond. So knowing that I can be alone, but I don't have to be lonely. And understanding what it means to create new systems that support the habits that I need to practice my values and my behaviors on a regular basis. Challenge the process is definitely something that I'm learning to do every single day. Which takes us to the fourth practice of enable others to act. So model the way, inspire a shared vision, and challenge the process in some ways have been more internal focused. Obviously understanding our values, aligning our behaviors, seeing the big picture for ourselves, challenging our own processes in order to achieve that vision that we might have. Enable others to act gives us the opportunity to invite others to join us. So for me, it meant being a Zoom meeting facilitator for other leaders in recovery, as a facilitator for Smart Recovery. It meant being active as a mentor in Facebook groups dedicated to individuals seeking freedom from alcohol. It meant helping others know that they aren't alone. So from a leadership perspective, enable others to act is fostering cooperation through relationships that are grounded in trust. And as you recall from the characteristics, honesty is the number one characteristic that we look for. Where there's honesty, there's trust. And we can't have one without the other. Enable others to act is also about strengthening people from where they're at. Taking them at their current level, encouraging them if they choose to change, giving them the resources that they need to be successful at it. So today we worked on, I'm gonna skip this one. Today we worked on enable others to act by having Boost a Beaver cards. So we sat out at the tables here, and Megan had made up just these quarter-size index cards and gave students, gave faculty, staff, anybody who stopped by could write a Boost a Beaver card. They didn't have to sign them, and it was simply a way to empower, to encourage, to enlist others to keep doing what they're doing. And then they put the recipient's name on it. Megan found their mailbox, and they're getting put in mailboxes. So the next time individuals check their mail, hopefully they'll feel their little beaver self boosted. Another element of enable others to act is finding ourselves in a state of flow. This comes from the social scientist Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, and he looks at flow. He's written several books on this about the psychology of optimum experience. There's flow in athletics, and it's really finding that intersection between challenge and skill. So knowing, yes, we're in a challenging environment, or we're tasked with a challenging project, but what is it we can do to rise to that level? And usually that's because someone else is enabling us to act. Someone else is helping us feel powerful, not powerless. And when we put ourselves in that situation, then that helps us seek opportunities to help build flow in other individuals by asking them where they want to grow, and then making sure they have the resources, the authority, the responsibility to be able to get that done. Oops. Finally, we get to the fifth practice of encourage the heart. This is practice number 5, not because it's the least important, not because it comes last. It's 5th because we first have to model the way, inspire a shared vision, challenge the process, enable others to act before we can effectively encourage the heart. And you know whose heart needs to be encouraged first? Ours. Too often we seek to encourage the hearts of other people and forget we can't encourage hearts without giving some back to ourselves. And by understanding our needs, by being willing to speak up for ways we want to feel encouraged, helps us be an example for other people. To speak up for their needs, to have their hearts be encouraged. So encourage the heart really looks at individualized recognition and reward. Now, the first thing that people think of when you hear the word reward is typically financial. There are studies and research galore that says, yeah, of course, nobody's going to turn down a financial incentive. However, they really want to be acknowledged. They really want to be seen. They really want to know that they make a difference. So encourage the heart on an individual level means showing appreciation for everyday excellence. Catching people doing things right versus catching people doing things wrong. So instead of a gotcha moment, it becomes an attaboy moment and allows us to appreciate what's going well. So there's an individual aspect to encourage the heart, but it's also making that known on a team level. It's being able to say, we did this together. To know that leadership begins with us, but we also don't have to do it alone. In fact, we don't have to do it all alone at all. We were never meant to. And for the longest time, 10 years, in fact, I thought I was alone. I didn't think anyone else could understand what I was going through. I lost a job, I lost a marriage, I lost relationships with my family, with my friends. And so I used unhealthy ways to try to get past that, and yet created even more unhealthy situations. I was 30 days sober when I posted my first milestone on Facebook. Let me tell you, that was a fearful moment. Because what if? What will people think of me? What will people say about me? What comments will I receive? Will people look at me differently? When I posted my 30-day milestone on Facebook, I was amazed at the number of people who reached out to me, not only with congratulations and support and encouragement, but with stories of their own, of struggles they had, of struggles of people that they know were going through. This is a look at just a few of the BV connections that have kept me moving forward. My classmate Jim Martin, shortly after I got sober, started doing, it was during the pandemic, started doing gratitude salutes. And the irony of this is that several of us would get together on Zoom and we would toast, them with alcohol, me with my sparkling water, things that we were grateful for. That was the moment that I knew I could be successfully sober and social at the same time. And so I am super grateful to Jim. The next picture you see is Pastor Ed Wagle. This just was a recent memory that came back. In November of 2019, I sent Ed a Facebook message. I remember sending it, but only after it's kind of been brought back to me. I sent him a message. I was still in active addiction. I sent him a message. I knew that he had become a pastor, and the message I sent him on Facebook was, Ed, I'm in a very dark place right now, and I'm not sure I can get out. Will you say a prayer for me? And so he messaged me back with a beautiful message of support. What Ed didn't know is that I was telling my friends and family goodbye. But thanks to that message, goodbye wasn't my last word. The only reason that I knew or was reintroduced to this was that Ed posted a recipe for chicken chili last fall. Being an active Iowa tailgating mom, I wanted his recipe, Facebook messaged him, and of course it pulls up your history, and there was that message that I had sent Ed in November of 2019. And so I shared with him that I wanted his permission to include that story today, and he was humbled and gracious enough to allow me to. It's reconnecting with people like my former boss and friend Mike France, and of course his wife Andrea, my former coworker from University Communications I was able to run into in Nashville, my friend Doug Truex, who is president of Iowa Falls State Bank, about 9 months into my own journey, messaged me that he was struggling with alcohol and was about to lose his family. His wife was getting ready to leave him. He was in dire straits from a health perspective. Last week celebrated 1 year of sobriety. My friend Sumo, who is a fellow Hawkeye fan, is another BV classmate, and the list goes on and on and on. People who their sons or daughters are going to school in Iowa, and they'll reach out to me and say, hey, can we get together for lunch? So knowing that I'm single and I live alone with my dog and an empty nester, I'm only lonely if I choose to be. That being alone, living alone, and feeling lonely are two very different things. So I travel a lot. My primary client is the Department of Cybersecurity with the US Senate. So I do leadership and organizational development for the federal government. And I will share every time I'm going out to DC, I will share, hey, I'm gonna be in DC. Anybody I know out there want to get together? And it never fails that somebody will say, hey, I'm in DC, and they don't live there, they just happen to also be in DC, and we'll get together. So another former boss of mine, Tim Seidel, who was the director of university communications at the time that I worked here, was in that situation. Another classmate of mine lives out in DC, and I got to see the National Christmas tree. So it's just celebrating the connections that, honestly, I took for granted. I took for granted how special of a place this is. I took for granted how the leaders, the faculty members, the advisors, the staff members who saw leadership in me before I was willing to see it for myself, I took for granted how important those relationships are. I'll never take that for granted again. And so for all of you who play a role in somebody else's story, don't take yourselves for granted. Don't forget to model the way, inspire a shared vision, challenge the process, enable others to act, and encourage the heart, because it starts with you. So as we've looked at the 5 practices from the Leadership Challenge, I do want to take just a minute and see if there are any popping off your brain types of questions more specific to the 5 practices that I can answer for you. I'm also going to stick around, so if there's other side conversations you want to have either about my experiences here at BV or life and leadership in general, I'm very happy to talk about it. Obviously, I'm an advocate for alcohol-free life, leadership, lifelong learning, but I also support choices that people make that don't necessarily revolve around being free from alcohol. Because what I've learned, there's enough blame and shame and judgment in this world. I don't need to add to that. So I'm wholeheartedly holding myself accountable, and I will help any other individual who seeks my support to hold them accountable. But I'm not here to judge anybody. I'm not here to shame someone, because for too long, I was laying those same judgments and shame on myself. So there's one more thing I want to share with you, and that's around leadership as a deliberate practice. Now, there are experts on expertise in this world. Of course, there's experts on everything. And these experts wrote an article in the Harvard Business Review saying that in order to become better at a skill, any skill, you need to devote time to practice, right? We know that. We want to get better at baseball, we practice baseball. We want to learn to play the piano, we practice playing the piano. But what we didn't know is it takes 2.7 hours a day of deliberate practice in order to achieve an expert level of skill in anything. So the first question I get when I'm helping leaders improve their skills is, how the hell am I going to find another 2.7 hours in my day? The thing isn't to find another 2.7 hours, it's to make the most of the hours you're already putting in. So if you have a clear outline of your values, you're practicing leadership every time you're aligning your behaviors with what matters most. So as you're practicing leadership on a regular basis, don't worry about putting in more time. Worry about maximizing the time you're already putting in. And I've got one more secret to share with you, and that's the best kept secret about successful leadership. And that comes from my friends, Jim and Barry, in the Leadership Challenge. And what I'm going to share with you as the best kept secret is probably going to be somewhat surprising, because the best kept secret of successful leaders is love. So I'm going to read to you from the last paragraph of the Leadership Challenge. Of all the things that sustain a leader over time, love is the most lasting. It's hard to imagine leaders getting up day after day, putting in the long hours and hard work it takes to get extraordinary things done without having their hearts in it. The best kept secret of successful leaders is love. Staying in love with leading, with the people who do the work, with what their organizations provide, and with those who honor the organization by using its products and services. Leadership is not an affair of the head. Leadership is an affair of the heart. And so with that, my friends, I wish you values-based leadership. I wish you lifelong learning. And most of all, I wish you love. Thank you.